On the first Sunday of Lent this year, I found myself huddled tightly in a group of strangers outside a church in a small town in northern Spain. My friends and I had just walked the first day of a 5-day pilgrimage, and we decided to mark the beginning by going to Mass together. For reasons that weren't clear to us, though the service was supposed to begin in 5 minutes, the entirety of the tiny congregation was crammed onto the church steps, which offered not quite enough overhang for all of us to be out of the cold rain. Then, at an invisible signal, an older man in the group in a dark overcoat moved for the door, and we all made our way into the sanctuary. A few parishioners took care of the final preparations for worship as we found our place in frigid pews. And finally, a handsome, silver-haired priest came out and began the service. I knew, of course, that the Mass would be celebrated in Spanish, and even after a 5-week intensive class, I only spoke enough of the language to order más café con leche or vino tinto. But I pride myself on having attended enough churches in enough different traditions that I can blend in wherever I go. I'd been to Mass plenty of times with family and friends, and wasn't the whole point that it was basically supposed to be the same everywhere? So I was sure I'd have no problem following along. And I was completely lost. The priest rattled off an incomprehensible welcome. The congregation responded, but I couldn't remember the English equivalent. I crossed myself just late enough to show that I was just copying my neighbors. To our delight, the priest took out a guitar from under the altar, and trying to be game, I sang the 2 words of the chorus I was certain about and kind of mumbled the rest. At one point, I was pretty sure we were praying the Lord's Prayer, and I launched into it with everything I had to realize that we were maybe saying the Apostles' Creed. I was not blending in. It was kind of exhausting, actually, being so out of sync. Then came the gospel reading. I did the 3 crosses at the wrong places in my face, and I listened as hard as I could, hoping that a few of my 500 Spanish vocabulary words would show up. Right off the bat, I heard diablo, devil. Okay, a gospel lesson about the devil, that narrows it down. And then a string of what sounded like gibberish to my ears, but then pan, the devil and bread. And then a whole phrase, no con solo el pan, not with bread alone. And suddenly I knew where I was, in the wilderness with Jesus, being tempted by El Diablo. That was enough, just those few words, and it all came flooding in, the whole story. What it says, what it means, the God that it points to, the communities that I had shared it in over the years, every year on this same Sunday. The 1,000 times I had heard and read those words, it all came back to me, and I found my footing, and I felt like I was worshiping, like I could pray. I could prepare for this journey through the wilderness for 40 days or more. Our worship theme this month is about prayer, and I was going to preach about contemplative prayer tonight, about my practice of centering prayer, in which I empty myself of every intention and distraction and wait for God in silence, wait in emptiness to be filled up. For me, centering prayer is a stripping away of speech and thought, a peeling away of everything I put between myself and the divine. It's my most consistent window on God's presence. And my thinking was, what better time, if you've never tried contemplative prayer, than during self-quarantine, when some of us at least have a lot more quiet, alone time than usual. What better time to empty ourselves of all of our distractions when many of them have been taken away already? What better time to be filled up by God than when we, at least I, feel so empty, so dry, so wrung out? It's never been easier to try centering prayer, was my theory. And then I tried it this week, right here, and it was a shit show. Like I said, this is a pretty consistently meaningful form of prayer for me. I breathe deeply, I let my thoughts float away freely, and I rest in God. And more often than not, in that moment, I am filled with a sense of peace, or a sense of call, or a sense of love and acceptance, with some good gift. And this week, it wasn't working. Because, and you'll be surprised to learn this week I had trouble calming down my mind. Apparently, I feel anxious about something. This week, no matter how much I breathed, I didn't find a lot of peace. This week, when I tried to let my thoughts float away, they anchored themselves in place stubbornly. Because, as it turns out, this week I am not free of distractions. I am very full of distractions, mostly the life and death of everyone I know and the end of life as I know it. In hindsight, assuming now is the time to take on the practice of contemplative prayer was what one friend of mine has called corona-cheever thinking. The thinking that made us believe that in 2 weeks we'd all be in sparkling houses eating healthy 5-course meals every night. And now we're binging Tiger King and ordering takeout. Not because we're lazy, but because we are small business heroes. Because as it turns out, we are anxious and depressed that people are sick and dying, that our leaders are fumbling the response, that it will get worse before it gets better. And it will get better. But right now, it's not time to take on something new and difficult, something we couldn't do even when things were slightly less terrifying, Now is the time to hit the easy button, to be gentle with ourselves and each other, to let someone else figure out dinner and also bring it to us, and maybe also feed us so that we don't have to take our arms out from under the blanket. Now is the time to let someone else figure out prayer, to use something ready-made, something that will do in a pinch. Now's the time to lean on the reserves, the things we've saved for a rainy day. Now is not the time for contemplative prayer, but the time for praying by rote. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Hail Mary, full of grace. Our Father who art in heaven, now I lay me down to sleep, whatever will bring any bit of comfort. Even if we can only remember a few of the words, whatever sends it all flooding back without much effort. What it says, what it means, the God that it points to, the communities that have held us in times like this. The 1,000 times we've heard those words before. That's the prayer that I have energy for this week. But even as I say that, I feel like I've failed you as a minister. Because for 3 years, I've been working so hard to bring you new words each week. We've been working our asses off to tell the stories in ways that are unfamiliar, to pray prayers that haven't been prayed in quite this way before. Because from the beginning, we've talked about Gilead as a work of translation, as a new translation, like every new community. A new translation of the story, of the prayers, of what it means to be people of God, what it means to be a church. And new translations are needed for people who have been left out or pushed out from the old, for the ones getting rained on, huddled together outside the closed doors of the old church. New translations are needed. But they take energy, and they take time. They take time to find the words that will stick, the ones worth repeating over and over again until they sink into our bones, until you don't have to think about them, until you can lean on them in moments of crisis or joy. It takes time until hearing just a few words brings it all back to mind. We haven't had the time. We don't have a Gilead translation of Psalm 23 that we all know and we can fall back on. I mean, presumably it's just Psalm 23 with more F-bombs, but we don't know where they go yet. This week we need the laziest prayers we can muster. The ones that worm their way into our minds until they pop up unbidden, whether we need them or not, whether we know we need them or not. And while our translation of the gospel isn't quite to that stage, we do have a few Gilead earworms. The second day of our pilgrimage, going up a big hill, I started to sing. Now, it would be a perfect story if it was like a moment of real struggle or crisis, but the truth is the hiking on the trip wasn't that bad, and the days were basically 6 hours of walking with good friends and 6 hours of drinking wine with them afterwards, so it was less a moment of struggle and more a moment of joy. But you can pray then too. So I did. Maybe it's a sign of weakness when I don't know what to say. Maybe I just wouldn't know what to do with my strength anyway. And then I immediately forgot what the next words are, but even those couple of lines were enough to send it all flooding in. All that song says, all that it means, the God it has pointed to, and the community I have shared it with, the 1,000 times we've sung it just this year. We belong to the light, we belong to the thunder. We belong to the sound of the words we've both fallen under. Whatever we deny or embrace, for worse or for better, we belong together. Maybe we've sung that song too many times now. Or maybe we've just been preparing for a moment when we are empty, when we're dry, when we're wrung out, and we need something easy and ready-made. Not a new practice, not a new translation, something that already says what we need it to say. Something that comes to us without thinking, that bypasses our anxious minds and connects us to each other and to the one we've always found 1,000 times with just these words.